Jose Rizal. Jose Protasio Rizal Mercado y Alonso Realonda, June 19, 1861 to December 30, 1896, was a Filipino nationalist and revolutionary. He is considered one of the national heroes of the Philippines, together with Andre Bonifacio. Studying in Europe, he was the most prominent advocate for reform in the Philippines during the Spanish colonial era. He was wrongly implicated as the leader of the Katipunan Revolution, and that led to his execution on December 30th, 1896, now celebrated as Rizal Day, a national holiday in the country. Rizal was born to a wealthy family in Calamba, Laguna, and was the seventh of 11 children. He attended the Ateneo Municipal de Manila, earning a Bachelor of Arts diploma, and studied medicine at the University of Santo Tomas in Manila. He continued his studies at the Universidad Central de Madrid in Madrid, Spain, earning the degree of licentiate in medicine, making him eligible to practice medicine. He also attended the University of Paris and earned a second doctorate at the University of Heidelberg. Rizal was a polymath. Besides medicine, he was also an artist who dabbled in painting, sketching, sculpting, and woodcarving. He was a prolific poet, essayist, and novelist, whose most famous works were his two novels, Noli Me Tangere and its sequel, El Filibusterismo. These social commentaries during the Spanish colonization of the country formed the nucleus of literature that inspired peaceful reformists and armed revolutionaries alike. Rizal was also a polyglot, conversant in 22 languages. As a political figure, Jose Rizal was the founder of La Liga Filipina, a civic organization that subsequently gave birth to the Katipunan, led by Andres Bonifacio, a secret society which would start the Philippine Revolution against Spain, that eventually laid the foundation of the first Philippine Republic under Emilio Aguinaldo. He was a proponent of achieving Philippine self-government peacefully through institutional reform rather than through violent revolution, and would only support violent means as a last resort. Rizal believed that the only justification for national liberation and self-government is the restoration of the dignity of the people, saying, "Why independence if the slaves of today will be the tyrants of tomorrow?" The general consensus among Rizal's scholars is that his execution by the Spanish government ignited the Philippine Revolution. The family of Jose Rizal. He was born to Francisco Engracio Rizal Mercado and Teodora Alonso Realonda de Quintos, who were both prosperous farmers that were granted lease of a hacienda and accompanying rice farm by the Dominicans. Rizal was the seventh child of their 11 children. Rizal was a fifth-generation patrilineal descendant of Domingo Lamco, a Chinese immigrant entrepreneur who sailed to the Philippines from Zhejiang, Guangzhou in the mid-17th century. Lamco married Inés de la Rosa, a Sangli of Luzon. Jose Rizal also had Spanish and Japanese ancestors. His grandfather and father of Teodora was a half-Spaniard engineer named Lorenzo Alberto Alonso. His maternal great-great-grandfather was Eugenio Ursua, a descendant of Japanese settlers. In 1849, the Governor-General of the Philippines, Narciso Claveria, issued a decree by which native Filipino and immigrant families were to adopt Spanish surnames from a list of Spanish family names. Although the Chino mestizos were allowed to hold on to their Chinese surnames, Lamco changed his surname to the Spanish Mercado, meaning market, possibly to indicate their Chinese merchant roots. Jose's father, Francisco, adopted the surname Rizal, originally Rizal, the green of young growth or green fields, which was suggested to him by a provincial governor, or as Jose had described him, a friend of the family. However, the name change caused confusion in the business affairs of Francisco, most of which were begun under the old name. After a few years, he settled on the name Rizal Mercado as a compromise, but usually just used the original surname Mercado. Upon enrolling at the Ateneo Municipal de Manila, Jose dropped the last three names that make up his full name, on the advice of his brother, Paciano Rizal, and the Rizal Mercado family, thus rendering his name as Jose Protasio Rizal. Of this, Rizal writes, "My family never paid much attention to our second surname, Rizal, but now I had to use it, thus giving me the appearance of an illegitimate child." This was to enable him to travel freely and disassociate him from his brother, who had gained notoriety with his earlier links to Gomburza. From early childhood, Jose and Paciano were already advancing unheard political ideas of freedom and individual rights, which infuriated the authorities. Despite the name change, Jose, as Rizal, soon distinguished himself in poetry writing contests, impressing his professors with his facility with Castilian and other foreign languages, and later in writing essays that were critical of the Spanish historical accounts of the pre-colonial Philippine societies. Indeed, by 1891, the year he finished his El Filibusterismo, his second surname had become so well known that, as he writes to another friend, "All my family now carry the name Rizal instead of Mercado, because the name Rizal means persecution. Good. I too want to join them and be worthy of this family name." Education. Rizal first studied under Justiniano Aquino Cruz in Biñan, Laguna, before he was sent to Manila. As to his father's request, he took the entrance examination in Colegio de San Juan de Letran and studied there for almost 3 months. The Dominican friars asked him to transfer to another school due to his radical and bold questions. He then enrolled at the Ateneo Municipal de Manila and graduated as one of the 9 students in his class declared sobresaliente or outstanding. He continued his education at the Ateneo Municipal de Manila to obtain a land surveyor and assessor's degree, and at the same time at the University of Santo Tomas, where he did take up a preparatory course in law. Upon learning that his mother was going blind, he decided to switch to medicine at the Medical School of Santo Tomas, specializing later in ophthalmology. Without his parents' knowledge and consent, but secretly supported by his brother Paciano, he traveled alone to Madrid, Spain in May 1882, and studied medicine at the Universidad Central de Madrid, where he earned a degree, Licentiate in Medicine. His education continued at the University of Paris and the University of Heidelberg, Germany, where he earned a second doctorate. In Berlin, he was inducted as a member of the Berlin Ethnological Society and the Berlin Anthropological Society under the patronage of the famous pathologist Rudolf Virchow. Following custom, he delivered an address in German in April 1887 before the Anthropological Society on the orthography and structure of the Tagalog language. He left Heidelberg a poem, A las Flores de Heidelberg, which was both an evocation and a prayer for the welfare of his native land and the unification of common values between East and West. At Heidelberg, the 25-year-old Rizal completed in 1887 his eye specialization under the renowned professor Otto Becker. There he used the newly invented ophthalmoscope, invented by Hermann von Helmholtz, to later operate it on his own mother's eye. From Heidelberg, Rizal wrote to his parents, "I spent half a day in the study of German, and the other half in the diseases of the eye. Twice a week I go to the Bierbauerie, or beer hall, to speak German with my student friends." He lived in a Karlstrasse boarding house, then moved to Ludwigplatz. There he met Reverend Karl Ulmer and stayed with him in Wilhelmsfeld, where he wrote the last few chapters of Noli Me Tangere. Rizal's multifacetedness was described by his German friend, Dr. Adolf Meyer, as stupendous. Documented studies show him to be a polymath with the ability to master various skills and subjects. He was an ophthalmologist, sculptor, painter, educator, farmer, historian, playwright, and journalist. Besides poetry and creative writing, he dabbled with varying degrees of expertise in architecture, cartography, economics, ethnology, anthropology, sociology, dramatics, martial arts, fencing, and pistol shooting. He was also a Freemason, joining Acacio Lodge No. 9 during his time in Spain, and became a Master Mason in 1884. Early relationships and ventures. Jose Rizal's life is one of the most documented of the 19th century due to the vast and extensive records written by and about him. Almost everything in his short life is recorded somewhere, being himself a regular diarist and prolific letter writer, much of the material having survived. His biographers, however, have faced difficulty in translating his writings because of Rizal's habit of switching from one language to another. They drew largely from his travel diaries, with their insights of a young Asian encountering the West for the first time. They included his later trips, home and back, again to Europe, through Japan and the United States, and finally through his self-imposed exile in Hong Kong. During December 1891 to June 1892, Rizal lived with his family in No. 2 at Red Naxala Terrace, Mid-Levels, Hong Kong Island. Rizal used 5 de Aguilar Street, Central District, Hong Kong Island, as his ophthalmologist clinic from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. The period of his education and his frenetic pursuit of life included his recorded affections, of which 9 were identified. There were Gertrude Beckett of Chalcot, Clark Crescent, London; wealthy and high-minded Nellie Boosted of the English and Iberian merchant family; last descendant of a noble Japanese family, Seiko Usui, affectionately called Osei-san. His earlier friendship with Segunda Katibak, Leonor Valenzuela, and an 8-year romantic relationship with a distant cousin, Leonor Rivera. Shortly after he graduated from the Ateneo Municipal de Manila, now Ateneo de Manila University, Rizal, who was then 16 years old, and a friend, Mariano Katibak, came to visit Rizal's maternal grandmother in Tondo, Manila. Mariano brought along his sister, Segundo Katibak, a 14-year-old Batangueña from Lipa, Batangas. It was the first time they met, and Rizal described Segunda as rather short, with eyes that were eloquent and ardent at times and languid at others, rosy cheeks with an enchanting and provocative smile that revealed very beautiful teeth and an air of a sylph. Her entire self diffused a mysterious charm. His grandmother's guests were mostly college students, and they knew that Rizal had skills in painting. They suggested that Rizal should make a portrait of Segunda. He complied reluctantly and made a pencil sketch of her. Unfortunately, Catibag was engaged to Manuel Luz. Leonora Rivera. Leonora Rivera is thought to be the inspiration for the character in Maria Clara in Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. Rivera and Rizal first met in Manila when Rivera was only 13 years old. When Rizal left for Europe on May 3, 1882, Rivera was 15 years of age. Their correspondence began when Rizal left a poem for Rivera saying farewell. The correspondence between Rivera and Rizal kept Rizal focused on his studies in Europe. They employed codes in their letters because Rivera's mother did not favor Rizal. A letter from Mariano Catibag, dated June 27, 1884, referred to Rivera as Rizal's betrothed. Catibag described Rivera as having been greatly affected by Rizal's departure, frequently sick because of insomnia. When Rizal returned to the Philippines on August 5, 1887, Rivera and her family had moved back to Dagupan, Pangasinan. Rizal was forbidden by his father, Francisco Mercado, to see Rivera in order to avoid putting the Rivera family in danger, because at the time Rizal was already labeled by the Spaniards as a filibusterismo, or subversive, because of his novel Noli Me Tangere. Rizal wanted to marry Rivera while he was still in the Philippines because of Rivera's uncomplaining fidelity. Rizal asked permission from his father one more time before his second departure from the Philippines. The meeting never happened. In 1888, Rizal stopped receiving letters from Rivera for a year, although Rizal kept sending letters to Rivera. The reason for Rivera's year of silence was the connivance between Rivera's mother and the Englishman named Henry Kipping, a railway engineer, who fell in love with Rivera and was favored by Rivera's mother. The news of Leonor Rivera's marriage to Kipping devastated Rizal. His European friends kept almost everything he gave them, including doodlings on pieces of paper. In the home of a Spanish liberal, Pedro Ortiga y Perez, he left an impression that was to be remembered by his daughter, Consuelo. In her diary, she wrote of a day Rizal spent there and regaled him with his wit, social graces, and sleight-of-hand tricks. In London, during his research on Morga's writings, he became a regular guest in the home of Dr. Reinhold Rost of the British Museum, who referred to him as a gem of a man. The family of Karl Unger, pastor of Wilhelmsfeld, and the Blumentritz saved even buttonholes and napkins with sketches and notes. They were ultimately bequeathed to the Rizal family to form a treasure trove of memorabilia. In 1890, Rizal, 29, left Paris for Brussels as he was preparing for the publication of his annotations of Antonio de Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. There, he lived in the boarding house of the two Jacobi sisters, Catarina and Susana, who had a niece named Susana Til. Historian Gregorio F. Zaide states that Rizal had his romance with Suzanne Jacobi, 45, the petite niece of his landladies. Belgian prose Schluckmulders, however, believed that Rizal had a romance with the niece, Susanna Til, in 1890. Rizal's Brussels stay was short-lived, as he moved to Madrid, leaving the young Susanna a box of chocolates. Susanna replied in French, "After your departure, I did not take the chocolate. The box is still intact, as on the day of your parting. Don't delay too long writing us, because I wear out the soles of my shoes for running to the mailbox to see if there's a letter from you. There will never be any home in which you are so loved as that in Brussels. So you little bad boy, hurry up, come back." Schluckmildes Group in 2007 unveiled a historical marker commemorating Rizal's stay in Brussels in 1890. The content of Rizal's writing changed considerably in his two most famous novels. Nole Me Tangere, published in Berlin in 1887, and El Filibusterismo, published in Ghent in 1891, with funds borrowed largely from Rizal's friends. These writings angered both the Spanish colonial elite and many educated Filipinos due to their insulting symbolism. They were critical of Spanish friars and the power of the church. Rizal's friend, Ferdinand Blumentritt, an Austro-Hungary-born professor and historian, wrote that the novel's characters were drawn from real life and that every episode can be repeated on any day in the Philippines. Blumentritt was the grandson of the imperial treasurer at Vienna in the former Austro-Hungarian Empire and a staunch defender of the Catholic faith. This did not dissuade him, however, from writing the preface of El Filibusterismo after he had translated Noli Me Tangere into German. After Blumentritt had warned, these led to Rizal's prosecution as insider of revolution and eventually to a military trial and execution. The intended consequences of teaching the natives where they stood brought about an adverse reaction, as the Philippine Revolution of 1896 took off virulently thereafter. As a leader of the reform movement of Filipino students in Spain, he contributed essays, allegories, poems, and editorials to the Spanish letter La Solidaridad in Barcelona. In this case, Rizal used a pen name, Dimasalang. The core of his writings centered on liberal and progressive ideas of individual rights and freedom, specifically rights for the Filipino people. He shared the same sentiments as members of the movement, that the Philippines is battling, in Rizal's own words, a double-faced Goliath, corrupt friars and bad government. His commentaries reiterate the following agenda: that the Philippines be a province of Spain, representation in the Cortes, Filipino priests instead of Spanish friars, Augustinians, Dominicans, and Franciscans in parishes and remote sitios, freedom of assembly and speech, equal rights before the law, for both Filipino and Spanish plaintiffs. The colonial authorities in the Philippines did not favor these reforms, even if they were more openly endorsed by the Spanish intellectuals like Moraita, Unamuno, P. and Margal, and others. Wenceslao Retana, a political commentary in Spain, had slighted Rizal by writing an insulting article in La Época, a newspaper in Madrid, in which he insinuated that the family and friends of Rizal were ejected from their lands in Calamba for not having paid their due rents. The incident, when Rizal was 10, stemmed from an accusation that Rizal's mother, Teodora, tried to poison the wife of a cousin when she claimed she only intervened to help. With approval of the church prelates and without a hearing, she was ordered to prison in Santa Cruz in 1871. She was made to walk the 10 miles from Calamba. She was released after 2.5 years of appeals to the highest courts. In 1887, Rizal wrote a petition on behalf of the tenants of Calamba, and later that year led them to speak out against the friars' attempt to raise rent. They initiated a litigation which resulted in the Dominicans evicting them from their homes, including the Rizal family. General Valeriano Weyler had the buildings on the farm torn down. Upon reading the article, Rizal sent immediately a representative to challenge Retana to a duel. The painful memories of his mother's treatment at the hands of the civil authorities explain his reaction. Retana published a public apology and later became one of Rizal's biggest admirers, writing Rizal's most important biography, Vida y Escritos de Jose Rizal. Exile in Dapitan. Upon his return to Manila in 1892, he formed a civic movement called La Liga Filipina. The League advocated these moderate social reforms through legal means, but was disbanded by the governor. At that time, he had been already declared an enemy of the state by the Spanish authorities because of the publication of his novel. Rizal was implicated in activities of the nascent rebellion, and in July 1892 was deported to Dapitan in the province of Zamboanga, a peninsula of Mindanao. There he built a school, a hospital, a water supply system, and taught and engaged in farming and horticulture. Abaca, then the vital raw material for cordage, and which Rizal and his students planted in the thousands, was a memorial. The boys' school, which taught in Spanish and included English as a foreign language, considered a prescient, if unusual option then, was conceived by Rizal and antedated Gordonstown with its aim of inculcating resourcefulness and self-sufficiency in young men. They would later enjoy successful lives as farmers and honest government officials. One, a Muslim, became a Datu, and another, Jose Asenero, who was with Rizal throughout the life of the school, became governor of Zamboanga. His best friend, Professor Ferdinand Blumentritt, kept him in contact with European friends and fellow scientists, who wrote a stream of letters which arrived in Dutch, French, German, and English, and which baffled the censors, delaying their transmittal. These 4 years of his exile coincided with the development of the Philippine Revolution from inception to its final breakout, which, from the viewpoint of the court, which was to try him, suggested his complicity in it. He condemned the uprising, although all the members of the Katipunan had made him their honorary president, and had used his name as a cry for war, unity, and liberty. Josephine Bracken. In February 1895, Rizal, 34, became acquainted with an Irish woman from Hong Kong named Josephine Bracken, when she accompanied her blind adoptive father, George Talfer, to have his eye checked by Rizal. After frequent visits, Rizal and Bracken soon fell in love with each other and later applied for marriage, but because of his bad reputation from his own writings and political stance, the local priest, Father Obak, only agreed to hold the ceremony if Rizal could get a permission from the Bishop of Cebu. He was unable to obtain an ecclesiastical marriage because he would not return to Catholicism. After accompanying her father to Manila on her return to Hong Kong, and before heading back to Dapitan to live with Rizal, she introduced herself to members of his family in Manila. His mother suggested a civil marriage, who believed it as a lesser sacrament, and would be less sinful to Rizal's conscience than making any sort of political retraction in order to gain permission from the bishop. He nonetheless considered Josephine to be his wife, and the couple lived together in Talasay in Dapitan. The couple had a child who was born prematurely, Francisco Rizal y Bracken, who died only after a few hours. Arrest and trial. By 1896, the rebellion fomented by the Katipunan, a militant secret society, had become a full-blown revolution, proving to be nationwide uprising. To disassociate himself from the rebellion, Rizal volunteered his services as a doctor in Cuba and was given leave by Governor-General Ramon Blanco to serve in Cuba to minister to victims of yellow fever. Rizal and Josephine left Dapitan in August 1, 1896, with a letter of recommendation from Blanco. Rizal was arrested en route to Cuba via Spain and was imprisoned in Barcelona on October 6, 1896. He was sent back to the same day to Manila to stand trial, as he was implicated in the revolution through his association with members of the Katipunan. During the entire passage, he was unchained. No Spaniard laid a hand on him, and had many opportunities to escape, but refused to do so. While imprisoned in Fort Santiago, he issued a manifesto disavowing the current revolution in its present state and declaring that the education of Filipinos and their achievement of a national identity were prerequisites to freedom. Rizal was tried before a court-martial for rebellion, sedition, and conspiracy, was convicted of all three charges and sentenced to death. Blanco, who was sympathetic to Rizal, had been forced out of office. The friars, led by the then Archbishop of Manila, Bernardino Noceleda, had intercalated Camilo de Polavieja in his stead as the new Spanish Governor-General of the Philippines, after pressuring Queen Regent Maria Cristina of Spain, thus sealing Rizal's fate. Execution. Moments before his execution on December 30, 1896, by a squad of Filipino soldiers of the Spanish Army, a backup force of regular Spanish Army troops stood ready to shoot the executioners should they fail to obey orders. The Spanish Army Surgeon General requested to take his pulse. It was normal. Aware of this, the sergeant commanding the backup force hushed his men to silence when they began raising vivas with the highly partisan crowd of Peninsular and Mestizo Spaniards. His last words were those of Jesus Christ: "Consummatum est," it is finished. He was secretly buried in Paco Cemetery, Manila, with no identification on his grave. His sister Narcissa toured all possible grave sites and found freshly turned earth at the cemetery with guards posted at the gate. Assuming this could be the most likely spot, there never having any ground burials, she made a gift to the caretaker to mark the site, RPJ. Rizal's initials in reverse. His undated poem, Mi Ultimo Adios, believed to be written on the day of his execution, was hidden in an alcohol stove, which was later handed to his family, with his few remaining possessions, including the final letters and his last bequests. During their visit, Rizal reminded his sisters in English, "There is something inside it," referring to the alcohol stove given by the Pardo de Taveras, which was to be returned after his execution, thereby emphasizing the importance of the poem. This instruction was followed by another, "Look in my shoes," in which another item was secreted. Exhumation of his remains on August 1898 under American rule revealed that he had been uncoffined, his burial not on sanctified ground granted the confessed faithful, and whatever was in his shoes had disintegrated. In his letter to his family he wrote, "Treat our aged parents as you would wish to be treated. Love them greatly in memory of me. December 30, 1896. He gave his family instructions for his burial. Bury me in the ground. Place a stone and a cross over it. My name, the date of my birth, and of my death. Nothing more. If later you wish to surround my grave with a fence, you can do it. No anniversaries." In his final letter to Blumentritt, he said, "Tomorrow at 7 I shall be shot, but I am innocent of the crime of rebellion. I am going to die with a tranquil conscience." Indeed, Rizal is perhaps the first revolutionary whose death is attributed entirely to his work as a writer, and through dissent and civil disobedience enabled him to successfully destroy Spain's moral primacy to rule. He also bequeathed a book personally bound by him in the Dapitan to his best and dearest friend. When Blumentritt received it in his hometown, Leitmeritz, he broke down and wept.